The doors to the Galactic Concord opened in perfect silence, the kind of engineered stillness that made every breath feel intrusive. 100 species had sent their delegates, and all of them turned their gaze toward the human as she stepped into the chamber. Lyra Vale moved without ceremony, her steps measured, precise, as if the polished obsidian floor of the Hall of Accord had always known her weight. She wore no armor, no translator implants, no ceremonial robes. Just a dark woven tunic, touched with a floral pattern that seemed almost rebellious among the rigid geometric aesthetics of the other ambassadors. Her presence alone was a violation of expectation. The warlords took note. 5 of them sat across the dais, each a power unto themselves, rulers of fleets and planets, architects of centuries of bloodshed. They had agreed to this fragile peace under conditions meticulously negotiated over 2 standard cycles. No surprises. No breaches of protocol. Lyra was a surprise. The Kelnari warlord, Arzurok, was the first to react. His 3-lobed eyes narrowed, his dorsal fin stiffening. The translator embedded in the chamber's crystalline walls pulsed as he spoke. Humanity has not held a seat in this forum for 800 rotations. This is irregular. Lyra tilted her head slightly, a gesture that might have passed as confusion or defiance. "I'm not here to hold a seat," she replied evenly. "Only to observe." A murmur spread through the council like low wind over glass. Observation was a neutral act, but everyone in the room knew that nothing about this was neutral. For someone who had never been part of their wars, Lyra Vale carried herself like someone who had won. The second warlord, Vreshtak of the Athari Swarm, tapped 2 of his 7-clawed digits against the edge of his console. His species did not believe in direct speech. Instead, his words manifested as rhythmic pulses in the chamber's light matrix. The translation read, "You bring no data. No demands. What then do you bring?" Lyra scanned the chamber, not with the predatory intensity common among the Concord's typical negotiators, but as if she were memorizing the room for a story she'd someday tell. "I bring the absence of threat," she said. "And I want to know if anyone here remembers what that feels like." Silence followed. The kind that wasn't emptiness, but suspension. Lyra's voice hadn't been forceful or eloquent. It had been disarming. The warlords were used to challenges, ultimatums, strategic concessions. Not riddles wrapped in vulnerability. For a moment, no one answered. Then Draxon, the warlord of the Syndral Shards, leaned forward. He was known as the Calculator, a being of synthetic origin with a mind engineered for warfare modeling. His voice, though artificial, held a trace of curiosity. "You speak in paradox. Do you claim your presence offers peace, while evoking instability?" "I claim nothing," Lyra said, "except that I am here. If that alone causes instability, perhaps the question is why." She did not elaborate. The calculator had nothing to calculate. That first session lasted only an hour, but it shifted everything. No treaties were altered. No ultimatums were issued. And yet, the conversations after adjournment swirled with tension. A human had said almost nothing, and in doing so, changed the air of the chamber. That night, 3 warlords held closed-door meetings with their advisory circles. Surveillance tech recorded nothing but brief phrases: unsettling, unmapped variable, and unclear intent. By dawn, Arzurok had issued his resignation from the Peace Council. No reasons given. No transfer of power. Just an empty seat. The news hit the council like a system shock. Arzurok had commanded an empire of 12 star systems. His withdrawal destabilized half a dozen ceasefire zones. Still, Lyra said nothing. She arrived the next day as before, early, silent, focused. She didn't sit at the center of attention, nor did she address the council unless addressed. But when she spoke, her questions weren't directed at strategy or reparations. She asked about memory, about how war tasted on the first day, about the last time any of them had held a child without armor. The questions weren't accusations. They were invitations. Vreshtak resigned 2 days later. Again, without cause or comment. His fleets disbanded quietly. No successor emerged. By now, even the Concord mediators were wary. One accused Lyra of subliminal manipulation. Tests were run. No neural interference. No psychic emissions. No evidence of coercion. She passed every scan. And yet, the pattern continued. The third to go was Drell Kara of the Broken Spires, who had ruled with volcanic ferocity. He left behind a single encrypted file with his departure, 6 words, translated from his native glyphs. She spoke the silence I buried. The chamber was never the same after that. By the 5th day, the remaining warlords avoided direct eye contact with the human delegate. She never raised her voice, never pushed her questions. And still, the resignations mounted. The 5th and final to leave was Ullon the Infinite, a being of liquid crystal whose wars had once scorched asteroid belts into glass. As he dissolved from his crystalline chair, he offered only this. She didn't ask for anything. That's what broke me. Lyra remained standing when he left. She nodded, as though acknowledging something he had finally allowed himself to feel. There was no applause, no triumph, just a quiet that clung to every corner of the chamber, heavy with the weight of things left unsaid. And yet, for the first time in memory, peace no longer seemed like an equation no one could solve. It looked, just maybe, like something remembered, something rediscovered, something human. And Lyra Vale simply waited, knowing the hardest part was still ahead. They called it the mind mirror effect, though no one knew if that name had come from the Concord's internal analysts or the frightened whispers of those left in the warlord's wake. It wasn't an official doctrine. It wasn't even a documented strategy. But after the 3rd resignation, it became the only explanation that made sense to those desperate for one. In the dim archives of the Concord, where diplomats and strategists trawled through centuries of psychological records, Lyra Vale's presence posed a question they couldn't quantify. What happens when a warrior confronts not an enemy, but a witness? Lyra did not interrogate. She didn't debate or posture. Instead, she listened. And she remembered. Every phrase, every hesitation, every twitch in the air around her. The warlords, built of war and shaped by it, had spent lifetimes mastering offense and defense. They had never prepared for recognition. On the 4th day, Lyra was called into a private session with Archivist Kale, a neutral presence within the Concord, neither ambassador nor negotiator. Kale, amphibious and aged, had served through 3 galaxy-scale conflicts. He watched her through a membrane of transparency, eye ridges twitching with slow calculation. "You're not dismantling them," he said, his voice gurgling softly, "but they fall apart after speaking to you." Lyra said nothing for a while, her eyes resting on the fluid display of stars hovering behind him. "They built their power on avoidance," she answered. "Not denial, avoidance. They knew what they were, but not who they became." Kale adjusted the shimmer light in the room, casting a pulse across the floor. "And you think a few questions is all it takes to undo empires?" "No," Lyra said softly. "But I think a single moment of honesty can." Kale leaned back, letting silence spool between them. He hadn't expected arrogance, but neither had he expected such gentleness. That's what unsettled him most. There was no pride in her words. No ownership of the outcome. "They're afraid of you," he said finally. "No," Lyra corrected. "They're afraid of what they see when they talk to me." When she returned to the council chamber that day, the 4th warlord had not yet arrived. Drell Kara's absence hung over the proceedings like a low-pressure system, waiting to break. The others sat in rigid silence. Even the ones not yet touched by her gaze avoided speaking. Lyra took her seat without flourish, her face unreadable. She watched and waited. When Drell did arrive, he did so alone. No entourage. No security. The warlord who once razed cities with orbital fire walked into the chamber in silence and sat beside her. The other stiffened. He said nothing for a full 5 minutes. Then, without preamble, he looked at her. "How did you know?" he asked. Lyra met his gaze. "Know what?" "That I still hear them." A breathless stillness gripped the room. Lyra didn't blink. "I didn't know," she replied. "I only suspected you might." He nodded once, and then turned to the council. I cannot negotiate peace when I don't remember what it means. She reminded me. Without further explanation, Drell Kara placed his insignia of office on the central pedestal and walked out. Not a glance back. Not a word of instruction. His resignation was not a collapse. It was a release. The chamber erupted after he left. Accusations hurled, voices raised, alliances suddenly frayed at the edges. Some claimed the human was a manipulator, a rogue empath weaponized through subtle programming. Others argued she was simply an anomaly, an unfortunate variable introduced too late in the game. Through it all, Lyra remained silent, observing, occasionally writing something into her notebook, a physical object unconnected to the network. It unnerved them more than her gaze. There was something ancient about her methods, something primitive in a galaxy obsessed with optimization. By now, the fifth warlord, Alon the Infinite, had stopped attending the chamber altogether. His statements arrived via emissary, brief, fractured, vague. But it was clear something had changed. His fleets moved less. His trade embargoes were lifted without comment. Internal reports suggested he was dissolving parts of his military into civil service. Lyra had only spoken with him once. A quiet conversation near the anti-grav garden outside the Concord. No witnesses, no transcripts. Just a human and a liquid intelligence, seated in a simulated breeze, talking for 37 minutes. That conversation, whatever was said, marked the end of Alon's reign. When word of his resignation spread, the chamber met it with silence. No more accusations. No threats. The warlords who remained, once fierce in posture, now looked toward Lyra with something else, something closer to reverence, or dread. She hadn't defeated them. She had, somehow, made them face themselves and survive the encounter with just enough clarity to walk away. Lyra didn't speak of it. She made no claim to victory, no suggestion that her presence had been part of a plan. She simply remained, until all 5 warlords had left the table, and the Concord was forced to accept that peace, once a construct of treaties and deterrence, had been birthed from introspection. But the peace was not stable. Not yet. The absence of war was not the same as the presence of unity. As she prepared to leave the chamber for the final time that week, Lyra paused at the threshold. Behind her, the delegates, those not part of the warlord factions, watched with uneasy curiosity. One of them, a slender envoy from the neutral Rethari cluster, finally spoke. Will they come back? Lyra didn't turn around. She only said, that depends on whether they can forgive themselves. And then she walked away, leaving a galaxy behind that, for the first time in generations, found itself looking inward. Peace was not a banner raised in triumph. It was a question mark etched across the stars, flickering with doubt and fragile hope. Lyra Vale returned to Earth under no formal commission, no procession, no public record of her impact. The Concord had not declared her a hero. In truth, many still did not understand what she had done. But among the few who paid attention, the quiet ones, the watchers, her name had become something whispered like a secret prayer. She found herself back on the green coastlines of the Auras Tract, a reclaimed biome once scarred by industrial overreach and now filled with unrecorded birdsong and trees tall enough to catch passing satellites in their branches. Her home was small, built from driftwood and smart glass, with a view of the sunrise where the ocean once clawed the horizon. She hadn't come back to rest. She had come back to remember. But memory, like peace, was not a gentle thing. It began with the visitor. He arrived unannounced, walking along the narrow path from the shuttleport with no escort, no weapons, and no translator. Lyra was already seated outside, brewing tea over a thermal stone, her eyes closed against the morning light. She opened them the moment his boots touched the gravel. It was Draxon the Calculator, once the most feared strategist in the known galaxy. He had not resigned. He had not spoken since the dissolution of the council. Yet here he stood, the synthetic shimmer of his skin dulled, his precision gait reduced to something uncertain. Something almost human. Lyra didn't rise. She gestured to the empty seat across from her. He sat without a word. For a long time, they said nothing. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper of static, and the ocean beyond rolled with unhurried rhythm. Finally, Draxen broke the silence. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice smaller than she remembered. Less algorithm, more ache. "I didn't leave," she said. "I finished what I came to do." His synthetic fingers traced the rim of his cup, though he hadn't touched the tea. "And what was that exactly? Undo us? Make peace by subtraction?" She smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was sorrow. "I came to see if they could stop being warlords. If they remembered how to be people." "And did they?" he asked, not accusatory, just tired. "Some," she said. "Some were already halfway there. Others may never get there. But the choice is theirs now." He stared at her, and in that gaze was the weight of too many simulations run, too many outcomes calculated and dismissed. "You spoke no threats. You offered no deals. And yet, you moved mountains." "No," she replied. "I stood still. That's what unsettled them." Draxen finally drank, the tea steaming briefly against his pale faceplate. It was a human custom, one he had mocked in his war briefings. Now, he found it calming in a way his circuits couldn't quite explain. "They're rebuilding," he said. "The others. Not armies, but ideas. A few of them are holding dialogues. On their homeworlds. With people they never listened to before." She nodded. "Good. And the rest? Still angry. Still dangerous. But quieter. For now." A long pause settled between them again. The ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then Draxen spoke in a low voice. "What about you? What about me? You were the catalyst. The one thing none of us could model. You showed us mirrors and made us look." He set down the cup. "And now you're here. Alone." Lyra didn't flinch. Peace doesn't need a throne. It just needs space to grow. He looked at her with something that might have been reverence or regret. "I think I came to apologize," he said. "You don't need to," she said gently. "Yes," he said more firmly now. "I do. Not because of what we were, but because I think we didn't know how to imagine peace until you made us feel it." Lyra stood then, slowly, the motion deliberate. "You imagined it. You just forgot it was real." He rose with her. The sun behind them cast long shadows toward the forest. Draxen looked out at the horizon, a stretch of possibility unmarred by fire or fear. "Will you ever come back?" he asked. Lyra considered it. "Maybe," she said, "but not as a question." He didn't understand at first. Then he nodded, because some truths were meant to be lived before they were understood. As he walked away, Lyra sat again by her fire, the steam rising in lazy spirals. She did not watch him go. She didn't need to. The future, for once, was not in what others chose to do, but in what they chose not to become. Far above, the stars shifted, unconcerned, unmoved. But beneath them, 100 fractured empires were pausing, listening, learning to speak again, not in war cries, but in wonder. And in the soft silence that followed, Lyra Vale closed her eyes and finally allowed herself to rest. Not because the work was done, but because for the first time in a long while someone else might choose to continue it.